Hello, I'm Dr. Scott Wadier.
And I'm Tommy Welling, and you're listening to the Fasting for Life podcast.
This podcast is about using fasting as a tool to regain your health, achieve ultimate wellness, and live the life you truly deserve.
Each episode is a short conversation on a single topic with immediate actionable steps. We cover everything from fat loss and health and wellness to the science of lifestyle design.
We started Fasting for Life because of how fasting has transformed our lives, and we hope to share the tools that we have learned along the way. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Fasting for Life podcast. My name is Dr. Scott Wadier. I'm here with my friend and colleague, as always, Tommy Welling. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Scott. How are you?
Awesome, man. Excited about today's episode. We got some cool stuff we're going to be going over. Recapping what we did last week. I was hoping that you guys and gals out there put what we were reviewing in terms of getting this tool of fasting into your day-to-day lives. We really encourage you to sit down and map out your week and figure out where this was going to fit in between the business meetings and the date nights and the lunches and the traveling and all those different types of things. So really hope that you did that. And just as a second of reflection, probably wasn't perfect, but that's A-okay. And today's episode, we're really going to dive into the benefits of fasting and, what they are, why we're doing it, and most importantly, how they can make a massive impact, starting today, but also for the long run. So yeah, that's what we're going to get started with. Tommy, you were telling me a funny kind of reflection or story that you had, and I'm looking forward to hearing it again.
Yeah, the other day I remember texting you, and I was sitting there. It was about 10 a.m., I think, and from the night before, we had some family over, and we were drinking a few beers, having some barbecue, having some more barbecue, a little more beers, and by the end of the night, we were all pretty full. We had a lot of food, a lot of good fun. So went to bed, feeling great. But by the time I woke up in the morning, it was sluggish, and a lot more sluggish in the morning than it had been the night before. And I realized by about 10 a.m., like I feel most of the food, like I feel like most of what I had eaten was not digested at that point. And I thought to myself, wow, like this is fine. This is fine. I ate more calories than I needed at the time last night. Here I am. It's the morning. It's past breakfast time, but it's getting closer to lunchtime. And I remember in the past, I would have been thinking, okay, well, what am I going to eat? I I may have skipped breakfast kind of accidentally, but lunch is coming up and I don't want to slow down into that starvation mode. I don't want to meet that boogeyman. So what am I going to eat? Maybe it'll be a smaller meal, but I'm still going to eat something. But I did not feel like eating at all. And over the last year, what you learn pretty quickly in the process is you don't have to eat that next meal just because you're used to eating at a certain time. And that was a very cool feeling. And even this far into the process.
How'd the rest of the day play out for you then? Because that's huge.
Rest of the day was good. Energy was coming up throughout the day. And I feel like if I'd put more food on top of that, I would have felt worse and more tired and sluggish. But energy came up. That fullness feeling just went down steadily throughout the day. Had an extra cup of coffee in there, some extra water, but by probably 6 p.m. just felt fantastic. I still skipped dinner and just went to the next day, but I didn't have to. I could have eaten if I had if I had wanted to, or had a social event or something like that.
That's awesome. And the more that you guys probably listen to this going like, okay, well, yeah, that makes sense. You ate a lot, you're still kind of full, but it goes a little bit deeper than that too. For me anyway, in that physiologically, your body has all that short-term stored energy. So that feeling of fullness, we kind of get used to the psychological stimulus of it, the outside, the environment, the schedule, the time, the habitual thing that we do at a certain time of day. Mm-hmm. And, for me, it was always, I used to almost fear dreading. I would have, a little bit of angst going into a big birthday celebration or, an anniversary
Like a
or
holiday.
a holiday, and we'd travel, and I would literally be like, okay. And I would say this to my wife, I can either eat or I can have some adult beverages. That's what we call them. So I can
Okay.
either eat or I can have a few drinks and enjoy myself. Because anytime that I did both, I felt exactly with what you just described. Right?
Yeah.
And it's crazy because then you would, I'd get back on my workout regimen. I would start tracking my calories. I would log everything I had, all 1,600 calories of barbecue and however many IPAs and glass of wine or, a little after dinner amaretto, whatever it was. And I would look at it and be like, all right, back on track. And then it would take me so much time to get back to, where I felt like I hadn't lost that ground just from a night or two. And, everybody might not be at that exact position now where they have that same, afterburn or after effect, but it builds over time for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And you could, if you're cutting calories by 3, 4, 5, 600 in a day,
which is standard.
And yeah, right. But then you have a meal like that, or, you have kind of a festive day. You could easily pack on an extra 12, 1,500 plus additional calories. And so that's multiple days worth of undoing that small margin. And it's tough psychologically, especially like a holiday weekend, God forbid, a cruise. Don't get me started. How are you going to undo a 7-day cruise,
right?
With just a small calorie deficit? It's going to be mentally, it's going to feel like you're climbing Mount Everest.
And there are people out there probably listening, will have some willpower, have some self-control.
Sure.
And yeah, on a day-to-day basis, you do that. But, year after year of struggling with it and having those ups and downs and being diligent and not getting the long-term results you're looking for, eventually it takes a toll, where you kind of get to a point where it's like, all right, you know what? I'm just gonna enjoy it.
Right. I can't seem to beat it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't seem to beat it.
May as well join it.
It's interesting because you had texted me that, and then I traveled for work, working on a special project up in the Midwest. So I'd flown out relatively early, and my parents had actually flown in, and then I was flying out a couple days after. And the airport experience this time around, I was sitting there. I had a delayed flight due to the brain-numbing cold that was in the Midwest, and I'm just sitting there thinking, and my stomach growled. And I was like, "Huh, that's interesting." I don't drink as much water when I travel because I don't want to be the guy getting up 4 times on a 3-hour flight to Chicago. So I was timing my water, and I figured when I landed, I'd, get 30 to 60 ounces in and be right back to where I normally feel good. But I was sitting there and my stomach growled. And normally when I traveled, it was always, okay, when I get to the airport, I'll get a coffee. Maybe I'll get a little snack. I'll go to the store. I'll pack snacks. I'll have my protein powder with me. I'll, pick up the cashews, but then sometimes you're like, all right, well, if it's not just work and there is some play planned on the trip, it's like, all right, well, maybe I get to indulge a little bit. So you start the process of, all right, well, I normally would get these cashews, but this time I'm going to get the ones that have the dark chocolate fun stuff in it, right? And then, so then you land and it's like, all right, well, I'm eating in an airport, so I can't get exactly what I would typically get. So maybe I'll indulge a little. Instead of getting the side salad, I'll get the curly fries. And then you have anyone who travels a lot will say, yeah, the airport bars are there for a reason. You get a downtime, you'll have a drink. And 3 or 4 days of business travel, and you try to do your best. And then, next thing happens and you're back to a point where you get home and you're like, man, what happened? It kind of spiraled out of control. And that airport realization this time was like, well, no, I'm fine. And we trained and had, a corporate meeting and a training all day on little sleep on Friday. And by the end of the day, I was focused. I was energized. I didn't feel sluggish. I didn't get as much sleep that next night because I had some work I had to get done. So I worked into the wee hours of the morning, and I didn't eat, the donuts and bagels that were provided. I waited until dinner again. And then I flew home and waited till dinner again. And I came home and was actually in a better place than when I left.
Nice. So, you pretty much stuck to 1 meal a day while you were gone?
Yeah, 1 meal. And I even had a couple of meals, which I typically wouldn't have. We went out to Mexican, and I probably ate a whole bowl of chips and queso with the guac. Like, it was amazing. Normally I'd try to limit that stuff, but the ability to, that realization in the airport, I was like, wait, this trip can be different, you know?
Yeah.
And I just hadn't traveled much since I'd started fasting, because we have two little ones and whatnot. So it was really cool to know in the future that it'll be a lot different. So,
Oh, that's cool.
yeah. Yep. We had been going back and forth about doing this, kind of segment as we roll out the episodes, in terms of a research-based topic, and maybe some current events, some social events. People that are having successes with fasting, with intermittent fasting. If you look up Terry Crews and intermittent fasting, you'll see how shredded and ripped he is at like 48, and he definitely does intermittent fasting. So those types of things, we want to weave them in and out of the episodes and kind of the teaching that we're going to go into in terms of the benefits of fasting. But the article is a mouthful, and I know you and I have already talked about it, but it's visceral and ectopic fat, atherosclerosis, and cardiometabolic disease. That is, say that twice. And it's a position statement, so it's a big review. It's in the Lancet Diabetes and Journal of Endocrinology in 2019. So this was from July 10th of 2019. And it was pretty eye-opening in terms of, what the visceral adipose tissue, and in layman's terms, that just means the fat in between your organs. And typically it's found deposited around the midsection, right?
Right. And it is dangerous.
Yeah. And, I hate to bring up my dad again, but, we typically see things through the values and the lenses of the people and the experiences that we had that are closest to us. Mm-hmm. So the first thing that the paper talks about, it talks a lot about BMI and cardiovascular risk and those types of things. But there's literally a list or a picture on the third page that lists the negative effects of having visceral adipose tissue, or that fat in between the organs and the fat that's centrally located around your body. And I was blown away about it. I mean, I didn't really think it could have all of these different implications, but like, I don't know what your thoughts were on when you read it.
It's scary because you start seeing all the downside of having that extra fat in the midsection, as opposed to, out in the periphery, on the arms, on the hips, on the legs. And that midsection fat, it really just starts to hamper every organ that it's around, and it starts to basically just clog up everything that should be working smoothly in the body. So you really start to kind of visualize each one of those little fat cells in the middle of your body, like, that shouldn't be I need less of those. You really start to put a face to each one of them.
It's an interesting perspective too. When you say it that way, I'm like, oh man, happy little fat cells. Like, our body wants to store, it wants to bring us back to homeostasis. It doesn't want us to go into a starvation mode, which is a conversation on metabolism that we will have in the future, but just looking at, terms like insulin resistance and impaired glucose tolerance and type 2 diabetes, which is so common these days that I don't think it carries the same weight in terms of long-term health outcomes that it used to. Hypertension and heart failure and coronary artery disease and valve diseases and arrhythmias and sleep apnea and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, stroke, reduced brain size, dementia, decreased cognitive function, reduced bone density, so on, so on, so on, and so on.
Wow.
So, when we're talking about, how do we take this information and disseminate it and, make it actionable, it really comes down to the thought process of, when we started, rolling these episodes out, and it was looking at your goals for 2020 and kind of what you want to achieve. And I know you and I talked about it. A lot of the times people say, well, if you get to the first layer or level, layer is actually kind of a good parallel there, but level of desire or motivation or mindset on how to do this or why you want to lose weight. Typically it's more superficial. Like that first layer would be, I've got a wedding coming up, or I've got an 25th anniversary, or I've got family photos, or I've got a trip that I'm going to be in a bikini, or, those types of things, when really it's much, much more than that.
Yeah, it typically starts there. And that's a fine place to start. I mean, We all see it. We walk by the mirrors everywhere. And that's a good place to start. There's nothing wrong with that. It should just be part of the story. And if you really give it a little bit of thought, take a look at articles like this and see what's out there, what's really kind of looming behind having those additional pounds. No matter how long you've had them for, it really makes you start to kind of build the argument against keeping those extra pounds around.
And the frustrating thing is, you and I hadn't been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, but based off my blood work, I was still getting positive results, meaning my numbers were normal, yet there was some indication of that, type 3 diabetes, that metabolic syndrome, that insulin resistance, kind of these words that you hear a lot. And I'd gotten to the point where I just didn't realize that was the problem. And, the long-term effect of it was my realization, you guys know, was when I looked at my dad. I was like, oh no, I'm turning into him. He's got a lot of great attributes, but his midsection is not one of them in terms of, the problem that I just found out. He's, there's now, medications involved that can cause people that are listening to this right now that think they're doing the right thing, that are having medical, personnel, their doctors and people tell them that they need to lose weight. The problem is the medications they're on, like insulin itself, is the hormone that regulates fat control. So they're doing all the right things, yet the source of the problem is the problem itself, is that you have the insulin resistance and you can't get off the merry-go-round.
Right.
So, when we look at the benefits of fasting, I mean, just the list is innumerable, but we want to go over a few that really kind of stand out that are directly related to the issues that were kind of in that research article that we were reading.
Yeah. I mean, you start there with the insulin that you just talked about. Insulin's being prescribed. It's the problem is that it's circulating too high for too much of the time over years and years and years. And then it's being prescribed because it makes the numbers look better that we're typically, the physicians are looking at as those key markers for the insulin or for the diabetes rather.
Right.
But they're not looking at the actual insulin resistance, which is piling on the pounds, and then the extra exogenous insulin given to the patient, which is forcing the body to pile on more pounds. And then every time you go to the doctor and you go, well, doc, I know I'm getting bigger, but I'm doing everything you're saying to do. And then you're looking at the blood work. Oh, well, your A1C is coming down, so that's good, right? Well, not necessarily, because if you can't take off, the extra visceral fat and those extra pounds, and you can't bring the insulin levels down and get off the medication, the only other way it's going to go is you're going to have to keep doing more and more insulin because your resistance is getting worse over time. So that's where we start.
Right. And that's the, the worst case scenario, where you're in that situation and now you have that external, like you said, insulin that is almost accelerating the process. It's like putting, gas on the campfire. The fire gets bigger. Mm-hmm. So when we look at benefits of fasting, and, the whole idea is to lose weight, and the docs in the medical system are not taught to teach patients how to do that. It's more, it's even less, I should say now, where depending on where you look at, it could be as little as 1 hour up to 10 hours over a course of 4 to 5 years of schooling. That's just on nutritional protocols and nutrition itself. So that's the beauty of the world we live in today. Is I used to joke when I was in full-time practice that it would be Dr. Google. So get on Dr. Google and do some research. Not saying everything that you read on the internet is true, but when you couple it with the research, like the stuff that we've been talking about today, the benefits of fasting are there's just so many. But the first one is it removes the insulin response to when you eat food or ingest and try to digest something. By fasting, you're removing that insulin response, which then acts as the hormone. It's the hormone that controls fat burning versus fat storing. And it allows your numbers to improve rather than the opposite, which is giving it more insulin and trying to force that blood sugar, into the cells that are already being, weighed down by the excess. blood sugar.
That time without food intake is the only thing that can bring the body's insulin level down to basically as low as it can possibly go, near zero levels over an extended period of time. And this is even if you're just expanding your eating window. I'm not even talking about longer fast necessarily.
Right.
Although that will take that insulin and keep it at those zero levels for even longer, obviously. But that's the only way to do it.
That's powerful too, because if you look at the more severe situation, which is the diabetic who's on, insulin, and if you are on insulin, talk to your provider, have a plan when you walk into the appointment. Don't just stop taking your medication. That's not what we're saying. We're saying, to outline the understanding of what the problem truly is, so then you can go ahead and put a plan in place. And it's the removal of that stimulus. So the longer you can go, the better you can be in terms of getting those numbers down faster and getting control of the situation. And in some of the research that we've been looking at and things that we've come across is that 36-hour fasts a couple times a week can do the trick in most cases. So you're thinking, well, I can't eat for 36 hours. Yeah, there's some things that need to be addressed in figuring out how you're going to do that. But that's why we always talk about the, motivation, the mindset, the motivation, the method, and then you figure out how to master it, over the weeks to months, rather than, sliding down that slippery slope of just watching it get worse. And people that aren't in that situation, it's easier for you because you just stop eating, right, Tommy, as you would say?
Yeah, right. Just stop eating. At least for a time.
Yeah, not forever. So other benefits, because, when you say stop eating, people are like, oh, what about my metabolism? Well, fasting has been shown to increase the metabolism. It's also been shown to decrease your risk of heart disease by lowering cholesterol and triglycerides, lowering your blood sugar. It increases growth hormone, which increases your body's ability to build lean muscle and use those fat stores. There's a few more. It normalizes ghrelin. Ghrelin is the hunger hormone. You want to get that hormone under control fast. You'll actually get hungry less, which is something that's hard for people to kind of digest, pun intended. And, it can also help with things as simple as, I shouldn't say as simple. It can also help with things such as stress and depression. Food can be used for comfort. I know when I'm super stressed, my cravings do go up, and there is a correlation there also. So just looking at that listing in totality, counteracting the list of disease processes that are related to visceral fat or visceral adipose tissue that is around your midsection. I know which way we're going to go. And we're going to go with the way of reducing that insulin response as quickly as possible and simplifying that process, which is, really kind of just removing the source, which is planning out your week and sticking to your timing. So the action step this week, Tommy, if you want to go over that.
So
should tie everything together.
So we want to reiterate what you did last week. Okay. So take a look. We were talking last week about planning out your week, working it around kind of pre-planning for those special occasions and whatever else you had during the week, business meetings or what have you. Go back, take a look. Where were your wins? Where were your losses? What tweaks do you want to make for this coming week? What were those things that kind of threw you off? And where did you have those successes, especially if you were a little worried about something being thrown at you, a wrench in the situation? Tie in your goals to those weekly habits. Pick a couple of habits that you want to put into your day-to-day so that you can measure it. You're going to value what you measure, and you'll be less likely to fall into that, hey, let's, join me for lunch, or all the things that can come up. And then review at night, how did I do today? And review in the morning, how you want to plan your day. If you review in the evening or review in the morning, you're much more likely to have a plan for the day and to stick with it, holding yourself accountable.
That's huge for me. If I plan or if I look at my day right before I go to bed and then I look at what's coming up for tomorrow, it totally removes those traps that you're talking about. I fell into it yesterday with the whole I'm going to get lunch thing. It wasn't on my plan. I thought, oh, I have this time, and now I have a date night tonight, which I had forgotten about. Don't tell my wife, but she'll probably hear it now that I said it out loud. And now I'm like, all right, well, now I'm going to eat within a 24-hour window, and that's not ideal for me. So that planning piece for me is huge. So hopefully that adds value to y'all's days as well. The only last thing that we'd ask is we are getting really close to being ready to roll out that challenge, which is going to be a 7-day challenge on leading you daily through this process. It's going to be amazing. We're ironing out the details. But in order to get the updates on that, 2 things you can do. One, you can go to our website, thefastingforlife.com. You can click on the download button for getting the Fast Start Guide, which will give you an overview of how to get started. And then also, if you go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, if you leave us a review and you subscribe, then you will be getting the updates and the notices on when we let that drop. Anything else, Tommy?
Absolutely. No, that's it. Just looking forward to the next step.
Awesome,
Happy
man.
to have you guys with us.
Appreciate you, and have an awesome day.
You too. Bye. So, you've heard today's episode, and you may be wondering, where do I start? Head on over to thefastingforlife.com and sign up for our newsletter, where you'll receive fasting tips and strategies to maximize results and fit fasting into your day-to-day life.
While you're there, download your free Fast Start Guide to get started today. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Fasting for Life.